Hey everyone. Thank you for joining, for tuning in. I'm going to talk about SRPDS, which stands for Seller Real Property Disclosure. It's a form that is a requirement for all sellers of this selling residential real estate to complete. And there's a lot of tricky things that are in there. Some of them are based on the questions that are a little bit confusing. Believe it or not, my experience too is that a lot of agents don't even know how to answer it. So this can be helpful. I'm putting this out on social media. If you are selling a property coming up, this is helpful for you to know some of the questions that might show up. Also, that form has just been updated not long ago. So in its previous form, it's changed a little bit in terms of its order, and some of the questions have changed and so forth. And also for agents. So if you're a real estate agent, obviously there's some tips and some do's and don'ts and so forth. So let me let's talk about this a little bit. So today's goal is to better understand the seller disclosure, which, by the way, as I've mentioned before, it's a requirement. It's a statute that requires sellers to complete this document. It is a requirement, not a request. So you absolutely have to disclose what you disclose on the property. I'm a fan of over disclosing. You can't be sued for what you disclose, but you absolutely can be sued for what you don't. And it really is probably one of the most important forms, because it also carries with it a statute of limitations on the content. So it's really, really important. Agents that are listening out there, whether you're with Keller Williams or anywhere else, is I would highly recommend, prior to that property going as a listing on the open market, being put on the MLS, that SRPDS, that seller disclosure, so I'll call it an SRPDS, that document should already be completed. The agent should look through it thoroughly and understand any deficiencies or any issues, or even upgrades for that matter, on the property. Additional questions should be asked. And when you're done, and when you put it on the MLS, you should also put the SRPDS on there too. I love when I'm looking on the MLS, looking for a property representing a buyer. When I look on the MLS and the SRPDS is already completed, filled out, I already know what I'm getting into prior to making an offer. That's super, super helpful, and also shows you're a professional too. For a license, I teach this class internally, so I always tell people, make sure you take notes. Here's a disclosure quiz. I'm gonna skip that over because that's really for agents. But a lot of this information is super important. I mean, here's a quote right here: is top 10 most common home defects is issues with foundation, electrical issues, roof problems, heating, combustion problems. That's not something that we have here in Hawaii, but air conditioning problems we certainly have. Improperly done owner repairs, that happens all the time. There are a lot of properties that have unpermitted improvements or additions or what have you. So that's a big one. And whether or not permits were pulled properly or permits were closed out properly. I've even seen ones where the permit was pulled, it was closed out, but the inspector didn't go back and check the work. So that happens sometimes too. Structural damage, plumbing issues, water infiltration by seepage or something else, inadequate ventilation, attic crawl space, construction defects. This is all things that would hopefully present itself with a proper home inspection, but it may not. And that's some of the issue, and why it's so important to pay close attention to the home inspection. So when you're a buyer, you expect that the seller is going to fill out the home inspection and include all these different things that they're aware of. But guess what? If they've owned the property for 20 or 30 years, they don't remember. That's the issue. But not completing it is not an excuse for not filling it out. And we'll show this document, this form, in just a moment. In fact, I'm going to shrink my side so you can see this a lot better. Consequences when when the seller does not disclose. So here's some of the consequences. If a court decides in your favor of the buyer, you may be responsible for paying the repairs and other damages resulting from that undisclosed defect, paying the buyer's attorney fees and costs of the lawsuit, in certain situations, actually taking back the home, and of course, paying punitive damages too. So here's an example that I had a number of years ago. Is represented the buyer and the seller on the seller disclosure. So this form that we're talking about here, the SRPDS, We looked at it thoroughly. No major issues of any kind that were noted. I mean, for the most part, it was relatively benign and pretty clean. Well, as soon as we closed, we noticed that there's some major foundation issues, and uh, the buyer's intention was to redo the flooring. So they were going to pull the carpet up anyways. They were going to put hardwood or laminate flooring on, but in doing so and pulling up the carpet, they realized that there's this crack that went right through the foundation, and it looked like moisture and water was coming through the crack. It was very bad. They immediately freaked out. Again, this is within a couple of weeks of closing. Of course, they called me, and the first thing that I did, because I represented the buyers, is I pulled up this seller disclosure and to look to see if the sellers even knew of it. Because if they didn't know about it and it wasn't their issue, they're not necessarily held responsible for that. But based upon looking at that crack, it looked like there was some sort of filler or something that was put in there. It didn't hold and didn't seem to fix it, but it looked like something was attempted to remedy the problem. So we took it upon ourselves, reached out to the listing agent who said they don't know anything about it. And they reached out to the seller, and then they relayed to us that the sellers knew nothing about it. Buyers hired an attorney. The attorney reached out directly to the sellers. And after doing some research and basically presented the facts to the sellers that they could be sued for a lot of money, and it's kind of a scary legal letter. And the buyers were definitely ready to play hardball. And sure enough, the sellers admitted that they forgot to disclose it, which is not okay, by the way. They forgot to disclose the fact that there was an issue, and that they try to remedy it as best they could on their own. So that filler that they put in there was on their own doing, and not through a contractor or not through a licensed person to handle that foundation problem. At the end of the day, my buyers had 50,000 that they won plus 10,000 for attorney fees. So that's a $60,000 issue. Now, I'm not an attorney, so I'm not giving you legal advice, but had the seller disclosed the fact that they had a foundation issue, which they try to remedy on their own, and they kind of detailed all those kind of things, we would not have a leg to stand on in our position that they didn't disclose that issue. So, one as simple as it might sound, just disclosing that item or that problem or that defect, if you will, in this case regarding the foundation, would have absolutely saved the sellers a tremendous amount of money, 60,000 to be exact. So it is really, really important when you represent a seller, or if you are a seller, to disclose. I'm a fan of over disclosing. Disclose more, because you don't want to be sued later on, especially if it carries with it some sort of statute of limitations. So something to be a lesson to be had. 3 out of 10 real estate professionals will be sued during their career. That's unbelievable, and a lot of this could be avoided, to be quite honest with you. A lot of it, in my experience, I've been doing this now going on 22 years, is absolutely avoidable. It's real estate agents kind of pleading the "I didn't know that" kind of answer, and that doesn't work. So we're professionals, we're licensed for a reason, and it's our obligation to ensure that we protect our clients. And a lot of these things can be avoided. It's a matter of disclosure. It's a matter of reading. And by the way, too, I mentioned to you, the on this side being the seller's consequence, but if you're on the buy side, so if you're a real estate agent and you represent the buyer, and you read and you get an SRPDS, that seller disclosure, and it says on there, yes, there was foundation issues, and you bothered either A, not to tell the buyer, or B, you never even read it to begin with, that's still an issue. That's absolutely still an issue. While it's absolutely something that all buyers should be reading that in full, that seller disclosure. Let's be honest, people don't read sometimes, right? Especially if they trust you as their agent. It's up to you to point it out to them. One of the things that I always like to say, that as our job and responsibility our fiduciary responsibility in protecting our clients, is to educate, warn, and then wait for instruction. So we don't dictate. We don't tell them you should cancel or you shouldn't cancel. That's not the dialogue or the cadence of language that we should be having with our clients, but rather educate them. Hey, I received the seller disclosure, and as I'm looking through all these things, I want to make sure that you look through them as well and see if there's any questions or concerns that you have. One thing that was a red flag to me was they mentioned they had a foundation issue. So here's what this means. We can ask them more about that. We'll also point this issue out to the home inspector so they can pay more attention to that area. We'll ask if it was done by a licensed contractor or if they did it on their own. And during this specific time frame, in our case in Hawaii, we have a certain number of days to cancel in that contingency of home inspection. So that's the warning. You're educating them. You're warning them that should you pursue this purchase and it goes sideways after they've already disclosed it, this problem becomes your problem. So we want to make sure that we do our due diligence and find out how severe a problem is this. And then we wait for instruction. Now that you've taken a look at that seller disclosure, please, speak to your spouse and let me know. Let me know what you think, if you'd like to continue forward or if we should cancel and go find another property that does not have this kind of issue. And then we wait for their instruction. That's what we, as licensees, we should be doing. And that's how you avoid this kind of thing. Being sued is typically being sued by a client because they felt that you didn't represent their best interests. 85% of all claims arise out of allegations that parties failed to inspect a property or disclose material facts. Agents or parties shall disclose all facts that may affect the value or desirability of the property. Super important. I mean, like I said, I'm a fan of over disclosing. You don't need to necessarily disclose. Some would argue that it's not a material fact that light switch or this outlet doesn't work. But if you know that it doesn't, I would put it on there anyways. E&O, for those outside of the industry or those who might not know, E&O stands for errors and omissions, is the insurance that's required for real estate licensees in this state to maintain. It's kind of loosely like our version of malpractice. More than 75% of all E&O claims involve failure to disclose. By the way, too, listing agents, if you go to the property, and obviously when you're going to the property to try and speak with that seller about listing the property, they haven't filled out the seller disclosure yet. That's a form that obviously we get started once we have been hired as their listing agent. So when you go through and you're walking through the property, you should be taking notes. I mean, you're not salespeople. I hate that term when it's relating to real estate agents, but we are far less salespeople and far more fiduciaries. So as you go through, take notes. Oh, I noticed there's a watermark in this ceiling here. There's a crack in this. It looks like a crack on the side of the foundation here. Looking at one of the sinks, it looks like there could be some water on the cabinet. Could that be because of a past leak? Like, these are things that you should be noting so that when you do discuss with them completing that seller disclosure, you can point out the things that you've witnessed with your own eyes. Because trust me, if you've seen it with your own eyes, the home inspector is going to tear that thing apart, and look for things that are far more detailed. So you want to make sure that you get ahead of that issue. So 75% of all E&O claims involve failure to disclose. Of that, 90% of the time, the agent or broker did not have that information. So again, that goes to what I just explained. The plaintiff's lawyer will argue and most likely win that the agent broker should have known about the material fact, property condition, or neighborhood, etc. Agents, we're not there just to, hey, press hard, third copy is yours, sign here, let me list your property. I'm going to put my fun little photo out front and that's it. We really got to dig deep and find out if we know anything about the property, because if we know about it by doing some research, and doing some research could be checking the previous sale, some of the comments or photos or anything like that. Even if the sale was 3, 4, 5, 10 years ago, if it shows up on MLS, that's a great way to look to see any other information. Because if it said handyman special at that time and now you look at it and it's been completely renovated, that's good. But was it done so with a licensed contractor? What was the condition of it before? If it said on their roof is about to cave in and you notice that's not the case now, who did the roof? Or did they even do the roof? Did they kind of cosmetically cover it up, or was the roof redone? And if it was redone, by whom? Were they licensed? Is there a warranty that's transferable? There are other questions that an agent should be asking in these kind of situations too. So hopefully that's helpful there. Misrepresentation is a lot of times it's zoning, square footage, conditions. So these are examples. You got to make sure that as real estate agents, when we list a property for sale, I'll tell you one hint that in my mind sounds like a no-brainer as common sense, but I see it happen often, is An agent will list a property for sale and they'll duplicate some of the information from the previous listing. Well, the multiple listing service, the MLS, as it's known, is garbage in, garbage out, meaning if a listing agent put erroneous or inaccurate or maybe a typo type of information that's on there, that's not gospel. That's not public record by which you should base the information you're getting from that onto the next listing that you intend on doing, because now you're just carrying forward that issue. So pull up, Realist or uh, Hawaii Information Services or the tax records. Those are public information. I'm not saying, by the way, they're flawless and they're without error, but at least you're going to a source of public information to pull that data up, rather than guessing or rather than duplicating or copying another listing. Failure to maintain the property, that's a big one as well. Breach of contract, that happens all the time, and alleged negligence. Those are all, by the way, those are all examples of E&O claims. When in doubt, disclose. You heard me mention this just a bit ago. You can't be sued for what you disclose, but you can be sued for what you don't. I really do take that, and I it's like a mantra. All of my agents hear me say that all the time because it's absolutely true. When I get and we'll see that seller disclosure shortly as I'm going to talk about it. But when I get a copy of a seller disclosure and I'm representing the buyer, or if it's for a property that I intend on buying, and I see that seller disclosure and it's kind of all either blank or everything just says not to my knowledge or NA, that in and of itself is a red flag. So if you as a seller or as a listing agent is you're filling those things out like that, and that's how it comes out, that's by no means any protection for you at all. Just know that. Litigation's expensive. You can spend upwards of $100,000 defending a failure to disclose lawsuit. You don't want to be lawsuits are awful. They're ugly. You don't want to be wrapped up into that at all. You can avoid some of that with very simple and purposeful and intentional actions, and making sure that you disclose and you document everything and so forth. Don't get caught up in just having conversations with people and not following that up with documentation. Documentation should be done via email, by the way, not via text message, especially for something that's important. How to stay out of trouble. If you represent the seller, do not fill out the disclosure for them, nor provide them with the answers on what to fill out. You can, however, provide them with the resources on how to complete this document. So it says it right on page 1, to be completed by seller. And I think, in fact, it's like in all caps, all bold and underline. And yet I oftentimes will see listing agents fill out the seller disclosure for the seller. How would the listing agent fill that out? The listing agent doesn't live at the property. It's not a good idea. It's the seller's responsibility to complete that, not the listing agent. Tip number 2, conduct a careful visual inspection of each property. Ask questions of the owners if you suspect a potential issue or problem. The problem you ignore or gloss over will be the one that comes back to haunt you. And that is absolutely for sure. And like I said before, that could be watermarks in the roof. It could be foundation cracks on the exterior. It could be a few different things, but make sure that you inspect the property. I can't tell you how many agents that I speak with, thankfully not with KW, that tell me that they took the listing and they'd never even been to the property before. As a buyer's agent, you might call and say, hey, where do I park? Give me some landmarks of where I turn to find this property, if it's kind of out in a rural area or whatever. And they'll go, oh, you know what? I've never been to the property. I'm like, but you're a listing, like you're the listing agent. Oh yeah, I just took the listing over the phone. That's crazy. Don't do that. Number 3, recommend to the seller to have a pre-listing inspection done of the property in order to have all information about the property to properly disclose. It's highly recommended for absentee owners or investors as well. Never suggest to a buyer to avoid having a home inspection performed. This is if you're on the buy side or representing a buyer. So here's the thought process too, and I do this with all sellers, is and they don't have to do that, but you're making the recommendation to protect them. I promise you that by the end of a successful escrow, the buyer knows more about that property than the seller does, 100% of the time, 100%. So I'll give you, for instance, if you've owned a property for 20 years that you've lived in, it's been your home that you occupy and what have you. And the layout of the property is kind of, as we get comfortable, it's kind of always been, this is the living room, this is where the couch is and everything else. Well, that outlet behind the couch, that couch has been there for 15 years. You didn't even know that that outlet didn't work, but the home inspector will find that out, when they're checking the outlets and seeing what works and what doesn't work. Well, the home inspector will also know that there might be a bird's nest in the attic, in the crawl space, or in the attic space. But I mean, how often do you go in the attic? Probably never. The home inspector and the buyer then might find out that there's double tapping in the electrical panel, but you as a seller might not know that, because how often are you going into the electrical panel? So there's a lot of things that are really important for a seller to disclose, such as the things that they're aware of. We've had the roof repaired 3 times. This AC has gone out twice, or even upgrades. Upgrades are still things that you got to disclose. We renovated the kitchen, and we got new countertops and what have you, because they still want to pay close attention to things that might be defects upon installation, or poor workmanship, or whatever that is. So you want to disclose. Tell them everything that you possibly can. But to a seller, I always recommend, would you like to have a pre-listing inspection done? Because we can take that pre-listing inspection that's done by a professional home inspector, similar to what a buyer would hire, but he's completing this stuff in advance of listing it on the market. And then we take your seller disclosure and we put that together with that pre-listing inspection, and we disclose that entire packet. Now you've really gotten ahead of, hey, this is everything that I know about the property. Could they find more things? Of course they could. But the point is that you've gone out of your way not only to fill out the seller disclosure, but also a pre-listing inspection. So it is a very, very good idea to consider. And if your seller says, no, thank you, I'm not interested, I don't want to bear that cost or whatever that is, that's fine. Just document that you've suggested that to them and that they've passed. That way you've covered yourself as a licensee as well. When you represent the buyer, I see this in other markets. I don't see this a lot here, thankfully, but in other markets on the mainland, um, you know, the home inspection period is called a contingency. And oftentimes, to strengthen the offer, because it's so competitive out there, I see buyers or buyers agents recommending to the buyers that they waive that contingency altogether. I don't recommend that ever. I mean, even in new construction, it might seem unnecessary, but in reality, I've seen new construction have issues too. The rule of thumb is, the older the property, the larger the list of things that could go wrong with it, and that's okay. That's expected. If the property is 30 years, you might have 5 pages worth of things that might have issues that you might need to remedy in the property. If the property was built a year ago, you should, in theory, have a lot less, but there's still going to be things that show up. But as a buyer's agent and a buyer, don't waive your right to inspect the property. That's probably the most important time frame, at least in our market in Hawaii here, to look over the property and make sure that you understand what you're getting, that there's any health and safety issues. And on the surface, cosmetically and aesthetically, things might seem perfectly fine, but there might be some health issues. What if there's moisture found in the wall, or some mold that you would have otherwise not seen had you not done the home inspection? So really important to do that. Tip number 4, generally the outcome of a lawsuit comes down to one person's word against another. If the agent has documentation written at the time of the event, the agent will be better able to support their defense. That's exactly what I say. If it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. That's what I'd mentioned before. So document everything. If the client gives you instruction, document it. If the other agent on the other side said something that's material to the transaction, document it. Per our conversation, you said that this driveway, we're able to use it as frequently as we want, even though it doesn't come with the property. Whatever the thing is, document everything. Every conversation that you have that's material to the transaction, document it. So here's the seller disclosure. This is page 1. It's a 5-page document, and again, it is not a request; it is a requirement. And so on the top here, where you see it circled, it shows on there that's the portion that can be completed by the agent from information obtained from the preliminary title report and or the tax records. Easy information to get. That's the information that the listing agent, listing broker can complete. The rest of it has to be completed by the seller. And look at that. It says right there in the middle of the page, I circled it for your convenience, must be completed by seller only. I mean, it's clear cut, but I see this happen so frequently that someone other than the seller is completing it. Now, with that said, could the property manager help? Could an attorney? Could a power of attorney? Could a trustee? All those things, potentially, yes. But you should forward that over to the seller and let the seller determine that based upon conversations with their attorney or their legal counsel. The purpose of the disclosure statement, pursuant to Hawaii Revised Statutes, which is HRS Chapter 508D. This is for residential real property, not for commercial. And under common law, a seller of residential real property is obligated to fully and accurately disclose in writing to a buyer all material facts concerning the property. What is a material fact? A material fact is defined as any fact, defect, or condition, past or present, that would be expected to measurably affect the value to a reasonable person of residential real property being offered for sale. So we're going to go over the page 2, 3, 4, and 5. This is what it looks like as a snapshot. There's questions on there that are very, very easy and kind of a no-brainer, common sense to answer. But then there are also questions on there that are very confusing to a lot of people. So I will give you some resources to that. Tip number 5, not to my knowledge and or not applicable, or NA, are not legal defenses against answering the questions. A lot of people get tricky, sellers, and they're like, not to my knowledge, all the way down, or NA, all the way down. It's impossible. If you own the property, do some research and find out some of the information. I realize that sellers may not know how to answer certain questions, but that's what this class is for right now. I know you can't see that. Real estate agents know where to find this document. It's found in zip forms, or your company might have it reduplicated and accessible to you within their own archives. The public who might be watching this, I don't know why you would. This would bore you to death, I'm sure, but you would get this given to you and provided to you by your agent. But I've retyped that question or an abbreviated version of that to the left. So number 1 is the property subject to CC&Rs? And are there any violations to the CC&R? So some of that would be the CC&Rs is code covenants and restrictions. That means simply, are you in an area that has HOA? Are there any violations of the CC&R? So I'll give you an example. In the Mililani area, there are community CC&Rs. So are you subject to CC&Rs? The answer is yes, you might be. You might have you might have a single family home, but within an association. So you're now subject to the CC&Rs or the association rules that might govern that area. CC&Rs can also be applicable to townhomes and condos. Are there any violations of that? That could look like a couple of things. If you lived in Ocean Point area in Eva Beach, you could have a storage that you put up that you got from Home Depot or Lowe's, and you put that up, but it exceeds the height or fence line or the height requirement allowed by the association. So even though in your mind, this is a single family home, I can do whatever I want in a single family home, that's not true. If it's an association area, it's governed by the association and those rules. But the violations would be, hey, I got a note on my door. So if you're a seller, for instance, and you got a note on your door, and probably one that was mailed to you as well, that said the height of your tool shed exceeds the maximum limit, and thus you need to tear it down, apply for a permit, or pay a fine, or whatever the thing is. Let's say you sell the property and you got that letter or note 6 months ago, and you just ignored it because you're like, I'm going to sell my property. That the answer here is yes. Is there any violations of CC&Rs? And the answer is absolutely yes, there is. And what's the outcome of it? And what you should do, anything that you've answered yes to should then show up in more detail in the comment section. Yes, there was a violation. I got this thing 6 months ago, never heard back from them since. Haven't resolved that issue, and what have you. So does that become the buyer's responsibility? Well, a little bit, because now you've disclosed that that's the violation that you're dealing with, and now they have to do their due diligence to either pay it or resolve that problem or take down that tool shed, whatever the issue might be. So I'm skipping around again. I'm not going in order because some of them are self-explanatory. Is the property located in a special management area? I hear this one all the time, and everyone has no idea what a special management area is. So here's what it is. An SMA permit was established in 1975 with the enhancement of Act 176, or known as the Shoreline Protection Act. And it basically is a permit that you're going to know this, by the way, if a property or a seller should know this, if they have special permits because of where that property is located. But agents, you can go right here. This is what I do. I don't answer the question. So if a client or seller is going, hey, am I in a SMA area? Am I in a special management area? you shouldn't be saying yes or no, even though you might know the answer, because again, you're not the seller. You shouldn't be filling this out. But you can absolutely come prepared, again, being a professional, with this information so that they can fill it out. And the link is right there, the Office of Planning online lookup. So I know it's a series of all kinds of things, but know that it's there and it's available. My agents just contact me and I'll give you all the links for this. But if you click on there, you can find out, put the property address in there, and you can see if it's in the property special management area or not. And whether it is or isn't, you can say, hey, I've looked this up for you, and just hand it to them and let them look at it. Or say, you can copy this on your browser as well, on your computer or laptop, and pull this up on your own. So you're not giving them information and you're not filling it out. You're just pointing them in the direction of where to find this information out from. 4A, if oceanfront property, are there any past and existing state shoreline certifications? And what does this mean? A shoreline certification is required for purposes of implementing the shoreline setback law and other related laws. If a property is in an oceanfront property or in the SMA, which is the special management area that we spoke about before, then you should inquire whether the owner has an existing state shoreline certification. So what's the difference that I asked that question between oceanfront and beachfront? Oceanfront can be off of a hill or a cliff or a bunch of rocks, but right in front of the water, whereas beachfront is literally a sandy beach. So important to know. Some people kind of think that this is applicable to one versus the other, but they're both important to have a differentiation and distinction between the two types of properties. Number 5 is the property located in a tsunami evacuation zone? Again, sellers sometimes don't know that, and don't say yes or no. Just pull up the information. Here's the map. Here's a little screenshot of what that map looks like. And if you go to that website address that's on the bottom there, you can put the property address and it pulls it up whether it is or isn't. So I would go in when you deliver this as agents, when you go in and deliver this blank SRPDS for the seller to complete, maybe print out some of these things for them. And when you hand it to them, so they have this information, they can determine how to best fill that out once you provide them some of this data. Is the property subject to air pollution? So this one is a little bit more subjective. I can't answer that for someone. There's no map to go to or resource to go to, but there are things here in Hawaii that we experience called like VOG, for instance, which is the like kind of the smog, but from the volcano. I'm not sensitive to VOG at all. I've never even experienced it once in my entire life, and I'm from here. But other people, seasonally or certain times a year, they are subject to that. So I think it's subjective. But if they are sensitive to that and had experiences with that, absolutely the answer should be yes, and they should just state that I'm highly sensitive to VOG, and regardless of where I live, I've experienced this, or whatever the thing is. That's how that should be yes, and then filled out with additional information. Is the property located in a geothermal subzone or near a geothermal facility? So what does that even mean? There are no geothermal subzones on Oahu, which is good to know. Currently, there is one geothermal facility located in Puna on the Big Island. So unless you are an agent that's selling on the Big Island, and if you are, then that is the map that you should go to determine whether that property, if that's applicable to that property or not. Otherwise, it's not. And I wouldn't tell the seller, no, you're not. I would point them to this. There's only one geothermal facility. It's located in Puna. Here's the map I pulled up. Here's where Puna is, and you're in, Mililani, and let them answer the question themselves. Number 9, is the property located in the regular path of aircraft, and does it experience regular excessive aircraft noise? Again, subjective question, but it should be one that should be taken seriously. In Eva Beach area, whether you're in Hawakale or Ocean Point, Eva Beach is kind of right underneath the commercial path of aircraft. So I've seen people fill this out and say no, and that's up to them to say no. But I can tell you that you can look up at any point throughout the day of Eva Beach and see a giant plane, commercial plane overhead. If you're outside of the Eva Beach area, could you still hear it? Absolutely. And if you do hear it and it's excessive, absolutely note it or document that. Again, it's subjective, but disclose. I haven't heard, and very rarely, by the way, in my experience, I'm trying to think, maybe in the last few years, I've had maybe 2 cancellations due to the findings of the seller disclosure. Maybe. So it's not something that someone you give to a buyer and they're like, oh my gosh, you have excessive aircraft noise. I'm immediately canceling. I want my money back. The point is just to over disclose. If there's any kind of hint of anything, just disclose it and be on your way. Number 10, is the property located within the boundaries of air installation compatibility use zone? What does that even mean? It's just talking about the decibels that you can hear through a military installation if it's nearby. Oahu specifically has every branch of the military. So conveniently, I provided the resource for it. If you go to that website, you can put the property address in and find out if it's within those boundaries. Number 12, is the property located in a special flood hazard area based on FEMA's flood insurance rate maps, which is otherwise known as FIRM, FIRM, flood insurance rate map. So what does that mean? Flood zones are specific areas that have been determined by FEMA to be at varying levels of flood risk. So I want to say, if I remember correctly, about 3 years ago, FEMA reissued their maps and included and kind of redrew some of them in the Eva Beach area and so forth. But I know my face is covering it. I'm gonna move my face out of the way there. But on the bottom is the link, and in that link you can click on that and then find out whether put the property address in there, and you can find out whether this is impacted or not. Does the property have a pre-flood insurance rate structure built? So what does that mean? It compares the date of construction or a substantial improvement to the effective date from the initial flood insurance rate map or the initial firm. Pre-firm is structures completed or substantially improved prior to the issuance of the community's first firm. Post-firm is structures completed or substantially improved after the issuance of the community's first firm. And rates differ based on the classification as pre-firm or post-firm. It's usually because of the quality of construction, but it does make a difference. If you have, I don't know if you guys have been to on Oahu, some of the areas that are near the beach or close to the beach, like Makaha, Waianae area on Hauula, North Shore side. There's a couple of different areas that are in flood zones, and you could have an older property that is older and it's kind of sits on the ground. The flood insurance that's required for those areas for any purchase, the property itself might be a great buy, maybe a fixer upper, maybe already done, or whatever the case is. If it sits on the ground and it's in a flood zone, it's super expensive just for the flood insurance on an annual basis. So much so that it prices a lot of people out of, even because when you're in a flood zone and you finance the property, you have to have flood insurance. It's not an option. You're not opting into extra coverage. If you pay cash for the property, you don't have to have flood insurance, but it's certainly recommended. It's in a flood zone for a reason. Whereas if you've seen those properties that are on stilts, like they're high above the ground, it's typically because that's a post-firm structure with an elevation certificate to minimize or substantially reduce the cost of flood insurance. So there's a little graphic as well, the pre-firm and post-firm. Is there an elevation certificate? So speaking to that is a great segue. Elevation certificate is a document that is prepared by a qualified engineer or surveyor, which provides information on the elevation of the building relative to the mean high tide, the building type, the flood map location, and additional information used to determine the proper flood insurance premium rates for that property. And so if you are a listing agent and there is no elevation certificate, but you know that you're going to need one, it's best to get that request for elevation certificate and the survey at the same time, because most surveyors can do both. Versus if you order the survey because you think it's just a normal transaction, you're kind of in that headspace, and then you realize, oh, I got to do a elevation cert. Then you order again. You're ordering from the same person, and now you just kind of delayed the process, and in fact, you might have to delay escrow as a result of that. Number 14, are there any roadways, driveways, walls, fences, and or other improvements which are shared with adjoining landowners? So what does that mean? This map is hard to read with my face in it, so let me take me out. Let's say hypothetically that there's a property here and a property here, and see this driveway that's along the side there, on the bottom right-hand side. Well, what if there's three owners that own, three homeowners of different lots that all share that driveway. That's what it means. Are there any roadways, driveways, walls, fences, and or other improvements which are shared with adjoining landowners? Why is that important? One of the reasons why that's important is because if something should go wrong with in this case, let's say the driveway, let's say that some of the sewer lines are running underneath the concrete and they got to dig up that driveway in order to get it. They're digging up essentially, assuming that it's split in thirds if there's three owners. They got to dig up the driveway. Who's going to pay for it? Is it going to be split equally three ways? Is it going to be the front two people and not the back? I mean, there's a number of different things. So the disclosure for this is important to understand, because if there's no fund that's already created, you're going to have a potential argument when needs like that arise. And when you have shared, in this case, roadways or driveways, but the same thing would apply for walls and fences. What if it tips or is falling over on someone else's property for a wall or a fence? Who's going to fix that? Who's responsible for that? So lots of things to consider there. And here's that expansive view of that. Number 20, are there any non-conforming uses or unpermitted structures on the property? What does that even mean? An example of non-conforming use would be if a property was allowed to have 3 units, but no longer fits the zoning today. So today's requirements, it's changed since, let's call it built in the 40s or whatever it is, for 3 units. Today it would be considered non-conforming. So it's allowed. No one's going to, say that you have to get that permitted. In that example, they're not going to force you to tear down that structure, for example, but it is considered non-conforming. So if you knock down those 3 units, they will not allow you to build those 3 units today. God forbid you had a fire or some sort of thing where it burned one or more of those units down and you needed to rebuild. They will not rebuild it to 3 units if it's non-conforming. Whereas unpermitted structures means there were no permits obtained to build the improvements on the property at all. That happens a lot, especially in Hawaii. There are other states. So I have 18 licenses in multiple states. Other states, some of which you have to have all permits, everything permitted or permits closed out in order for you to sell a property. In this state, you don't. So unpermitted structures or unpermitted improvements, especially if they include square footage or these kind of things, could definitely reduce the marketability and value of the property potentially. So for instance, if you have a 4-bedroom home, but it's permitted for 3 bedrooms, an appraiser will only give it value to 3 bedrooms, what it's permitted for. So essentially this 4th bedroom, while it's still desirable, someone still wants to buy it as a result of having that 4th bedroom. If it's not permitted, they're not going to give you the value for that. So there's that. And there's also things that are potential bigger issues, roofing and these kind of things. If it's unpermitted, those improvements, you want to make sure that those are properly disclosed as well. Number 21, is the property exposed to other types of recurring excessive noise? This one is important to know. Is there was lawsuits, they've been lawsuits before of excessive noise in the neighborhoods. There's a Koki Frog, specifically Koki Frog disclosure. I think that's mainly on the Big Island, but they're so loud that the seller of a property didn't disclose of how loud this was. And the buyers who obtained that property sued them for the excessive noise. So super important to know. Try to really dig deep through the eyes of someone who's brand new to purchasing the property to ensure that, what sounds would they hear that you might be now used to. And it's really important to disclose all of those sounds. 27, is there filled land on the property? That one is pretty simple to answer. If ever you maybe are covering up a pool or maybe it's leveling off the land and you brought in soil, the answer to that is yes, there's filled land on the property. Why is that a big deal? Pesticides or other contaminants that could be found in the soil that you're using to fill. And it could have poison in it. It could have other things, other contaminants in it. So one of the large builders, I won't mention their name, that was building on the west side in Waianae area, when they were doing their new construction, had purchased land or soil, rather dirt, from what ended up being a contaminated area. So they had disclosures in their purchase contracts to notify everybody that FYI, the land, the soil and dirt that we use to fill the land may have been contaminated. Number 31, were additions, modifications, and or alterations made to the property without obtaining required approvals. This could be, I would think of this personally, both from single family perspective, from the permitting and the Department of Planning, as well as, yes, if it were a condo or townhome and you did some things that otherwise should have had the approval through the association. And by the way, that question comes up in another form in the condo section as well. Number 32, does any other party have an unrecorded interest in the property? And so what does that even mean? Well, examples would be like, did the sellers borrow money for down payment and maybe they owe that money back to someone? Because you don't want that to stop that process, or somebody to put a lien on your property, the buyer's property, when it closes. Or borrowing money that was obligated as an unofficial lien on the home. Sometimes people do what's called silent seconds. That could end up being a lawsuit afterwards, or a beneficiary in a trust that's not a trustee. Those are examples of other parties having unrecorded interest in the property. So this is asking the question about HOA. Is membership mandatory? As far as I know, anywhere, gosh, I can't even think of a single time it hasn't. But anytime that you are in an association, whether a condo or townhome, or a single family that's part of a community association, membership is mandatory. It's not, you can't opt out of that. Not only do you pay the bill, but you're also subject to the rules of that association. So is membership mandatory? Only the seller can answer that, but I've never seen one time that it wasn't. Number 4, this is the one that shows up twice. If you are aware of future maintenance fee increases, special assessments, association loans, or pending litigation against the association. So super important. If you're aware of this, disclose it. Even if even if it wasn't something that came down by way of the vote of the association that they've already approved it, but you know that they will be approving it, just save yourself, say yes, and then say nothing formally voted on, nothing official yet, but I've heard talks that they might be raising the maintenance fees by X, whatever that is. Again, over disclosure is not a bad thing. Talking to some of these things. 8A, if the unit includes parking, is it deeded with the unit? In associations, especially condos, townhomes, typically the parking stall is not deeded. There's a couple of buildings that are, so I don't want to say it's never happens, but this is really important to know as well, because there are some people that are superstitious. There are also some people that like that specific parking. Like maybe it's right next to the elevator, or there's no one on the other side of that, or whatever that thing is. In many cases, if the parking stall is a common area, the association owns it. They can choose to kind of swap parking with someone else or renumber it. If someone's superstitious and was like, I need to have number 1 or whatever that is, and they reorder the numbers, and now you're, number 7, and that's an unlucky number. Those are things just to bear in mind when you disclose it, that it's not that simple, that some people buy it they want this property versus another one based upon all the things that go along with it. The parking stall, where it's located, the parking stall number, and so forth. So make sure you disclose that. 8B, are there any issues or special arrangements with the parking stalls? This could be as simple as, like, for me, for instance, if there were guest stalls, this is not always what it's talking about, but again, over disclose. So guest stalls, you can only park there up until 10 p.m. at night, or whatever the thing is. It's a tollway zone after 10 o'clock. I would say yes, and I would just state that in the comment section. You would say yes, and then what that reasoning is. Or if special arrangements would be things like, my stall is actually 25, but then I use number 7 because we swapped it and we're both okay with that. That's a special arrangement. Or are you renting out? Maybe you have 3 stalls, so you're renting one of them out because you only need 2. That's a special arrangement too. So those are the kinds of things that they're talking about. Then it moves on. I'm going to move my face out of this section here. Do any improvements, additions, structural modifications, or alterations exist at the property without required building permits, association design committee, or other government approval? So this is what I was kind of alluding to the last time as well, is if you are in a condo, like a high-rise condo, and they allow for the window AC units, which is kind of common, but you have to have a permit for it, and you don't, and you're like, hey, I think it's okay because I've never been fined. I don't have any issues with it. I have no one's ever complained about it. That's, if you're supposed to, based upon the condo docs and the house rules and so forth, you're supposed to have already gone through an approval process. You got to note that. you got to make sure, because the last thing that you would want is the buyer to purchase it, get hit with that fine or penalty, or God forbid, I was showing a property one time to a high rise unit. I mean, to a buyer of a high rise unit. And we looked outside and we saw, I don't know, maybe 20 to 25% of the units had a window AC. And one could presume that that would mean that that building allows for that. So I looked into it. So we were interested in making an offer on it. A buyer was super excited about the area, the layout, the price, the whole thing. The whole thing kind of made sense to them. But the key requirement for them, specifically in purchasing, was having an AC unit. And this is the only AC unit that there was on this window unit. So I did some research for the buyer prior to making an offer, and found out that the building does not even allow window AC units. That those that have it are doing so um, without without approval. And they were going to go around and had a campaign going around soon after of having people remove it and finding them and so forth. So had I not looked into that, I'm on the buy side too, but this is why as a buyer's agent, you still got to review everything and look and kind of be informed and do your research. But had I not pointed that out, my buyer would have been so upset with me and the whole home buying experience, about wanting an AC unit and buying a property that thought having this AC unit in there would be fine. And to come to find out it wasn't. That would have been detrimental. And that's not an experience that we want to give to people too. Number 9, has there been any evidence or presence of mold, mildew, or fungus on the interior or exterior? I got to tell you, we live in Hawaii and there's a lot of mildew. Have you ever had mildew that has built up on the back of like a shower curtain? So again, in the spirit of over disclosing, if it were me, and again, you're not filling this out for the seller, but that's the example I would pose. If they said, "Oh no, we've never had mold or mildew," I would have said, "Have you ever experienced, like on the exterior near the spigot out front by the hose, where kind of mildew builds up around the siding area or the foundation area?" "Oh yeah." Oh, you kind of bringing them to the conclusion that maybe that might mean that. Or on the interior, you ever have like mildew build up on the back of a shower curtain, for instance? Oh, okay. Obviously, they're talking about serious things as well. So don't leave out if there's actual mold that they've remedied or have currently or whatever it is. They got to disclose that as well. But though that's the example, I think that people kind of blow right through and saying no, there's no issue with that whatsoever. So don't take that lightly. And it gives kind of the example that I gave there. Has there ever been any evidence of pest infestation? And so this is the last slide here, and the answer to that is absolutely. I mean, again, we don't want to give the answer to the seller to complete for them, but have you ever seen a roach before? I mean, we live in the tropics. Have you ever seen a roach before? Our roaches fly, for that matter. So even if they've seen one, or if they've seen some ants, they may not have a pest infestation. This is the subjectivity part of that question. If it were me and I'm the seller, I would say yes, and then just say, and see in these that last section where all those lines are. That's where the seller can put in there, as well as extend it out to another document, all the comments and reasonings and so forth. So if you've checked yes to anything that's on here on any page, there should be a subsequent comment along with it to fill that out properly. So the answer to that would be, yes, I've had a couple of roaches that I've found, as well as some ants, and I've remedied that with over the counter or household pest spray, or something to that effect. Or if it's more serious, yes, I have regular pest treatment through blank company every single month, or as needed, or whatever it is. So whatever it is, disclose it. I don't know how there wouldn't be any kind of pest that someone would have seen, especially in Hawaii. But that's it, folks. That is an explanation. I know it's been almost an hour, so thank you for sticking in with me. If you have, this was meant for real estate agents, both on the buy side and the list side, as well as sellers and buyers too. If you've lasted this long through it, I know it's a lot of industry talk, a lot of legal talk, or what have you. But at the end of the day, our goal is to make sure that you get the property that you want. But we disclose it. We help you do all your due diligence in ending up with that. property, and we know hopefully more about the property than the seller does. In addition, there's sometimes needs for a need for an amended disclosure, and that could be because you forgot something. It could also mean it could arrive because you heard or was witness to the seller doing, I mean, the buyer doing the home inspection. You learned some new things about the property, as I'd mentioned before. It could be something new that happened. I had a property once. I represented the buyer, and we were a few days from closing, and everything was fine. And suddenly, the seller, which they're not supposed to do, the seller terminated and canceled their electricity, which caused the refrigerator to go out, the ice maker to melt, to leak onto this laminate floor, basically, essentially warping and ruining about a 2 feet by 2 feet area right beneath the refrigerator for where all the water pooled. And unfortunately, they didn't make a manufacturer that type of flooring anymore. So we had to refloor. It ended up being what you would have thought would be a simple, few $100 fix. It ended up being an insurance claim for $25,000 plus. And the need to redisclose this. So it's going to be this document, but on an amended disclosure. So there are times where that comes about as well, but disclosing and doing that the right way will get you much further. And so the purpose of me putting this together is there's a handful of questions as we went through that agents don't know how to advise their clients, and the sellers don't even know how to answer. And I think by educating yourselves and knowing how to the resources to get to for those answers will help limit and prevent getting sued later, and also provide the best service and experience possible for our clients. So thank you for joining today. I greatly appreciate it. Can't wait to see you on the next one, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day.